Hi, this is Bruce Lindsay, working with Elizabeth Gallo on our project to document the stories of veterans. Today we are with Vietnam War veteran Chuck Bechtel. Chuck served as a platoon leader in the Vietnam War. After the war, he stayed in the Army, retiring as a colonel. Chuck recently had the opportunity to return to Vietnam and wrote a book about it. And the book is called Sent to War, Returning for Peace.
I was part of the 2.2 million people drafted for the Vietnam War. I got drafted in 1966. I grew up in a small town in Ashland, Pennsylvania, in the coal region, and at a time when obviously coal was going downhill. And I was working in Holy Spirit Hospital as a technician, actually had a good job, and got drafted. It was unfortunate. Things were going well. I just bought my dream car, 65 GTO convertible, planned on using it to visit the girls on the weekend. I got drafted. After I went through basic and advanced training, I wound up going to Infantry Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning, Georgia. It's almost 6 months long. Immediately after that, I then went for 2 months to Ranger School in the Army. After that, I was assigned to Fort Hood, Texas as a company commander in a mechanized infantry company, part of the 2nd Armored Division. And it was interesting because I was a brand new second lieutenant, never had a job. And I wound up as a commander of a 250-man mechanized company. And if you think about the time, our primary enemy was not Vietnam, it was the Soviet Union. We were getting ready to fight World War III. It was an indication even at that time, and I was too young to realize it, that the Army was already consuming itself over the Vietnam War. I mean, can you imagine having a brand new second lieutenant as a commander and sending that unit to combat, which would have been World War III? After that, I took the command of the unit at Fort Hood, Texas, and after commanding for almost a year, I got orders to go to Vietnam to join the 1st Cavalry Division, Air Mobile. The Air Mobile part is real important because we had 400 of our own helicopters. And we pursued the enemy all over I Corps and II Corps in North Vietnam. Vietnam War was the first time the helicopter was used as a weapon system. And it was the 1st Cavalry Division that used it very well. We had the heavy lift helicopter, CH-47, and then we had the workhorse, the Huey helicopter, which delivered us to the battlefield. And when we went into the battle, we would stand on the skids and we would jump off the helicopter as soon as possible because the helicopters were bullet magnets. And the 1st Cav, like I said, commanders had tremendous mobility. They moved quickly. The enemy never knew exactly when we were coming, how we would come. And the helicopters were real workhorses. They would take us into combat, and once a battle was joined, the commanders were quickly calling for ammunition and water. And those young men in their flying machines always came back. A lot of them got shot down. So that was my job in Vietnam. I led a 40-man rifle platoon in the infantry. And the mission of the infantry hasn't changed much in 100 years. It's very simple. Close with, kill, and capture the enemy. The only problem is the enemy is trying to do the same thing to you. So after my time in Vietnam, and I wound up with a tropical disease that put me in the hospital for months, came back to the States and was discharged from there. I decided to stay in the Army, got promoted to captain, and then I went into the reserves afterwards. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back on active duty, and I went to school full time and got my degree on the GI Bill. I saved some money, and I wound up also getting a master's degree from Penn State. So when I think about it, Uncle Sam gave me the opportunity to die for my country, literally. But on the other hand, I grew up in a poor family in the coal region. Uncle Sam gave me the opportunity, really, opportunity I would not have had otherwise. I retired after 35 years as a full colonel. And during that time, I had the privilege of commanding soldiers at every level up to a 2,000-man brigade for Desert Storm. I had a good career. But I would not be telling you the truth if I did not tell you that I always harbored a knot of resentment in my gut at the way we Vietnam veterans were treated by the country that sent them to war. And you read that in my book, and I go into it in detail. Mm-hmm. In fact, in my book, I name veterans. I name veterans from our area right here. Tom Four in Mechanicsburg had bags of urine thrown at him. Bruce McCullough, the commander of the VFW in Lidditz, 8 years as a commander, 2 tours. When he came home with an Army buddy. They landed in the San Francisco airport. They were told to take their uniform off. How shameful is that? Take your uniform off. These are kids coming off the battlefield. But they didn't get them off fast enough. And a girl came up to his Army buddy, made a disparaging comment and spit in his face. I have it all listed in here. I named the names. So the reason I wrote this book is because I had the opportunity to go back to Vietnam in June of 2022 with an extraordinary group. It was an extraordinary group. It was 12 other veterans, and there were more American heroes on that trip. One guy, his name was Charlie Miller, 6'5" Marine. He was literally blown apart in the Nang area with his Marines. He was out on patrol. He was in the Navy hospital in Philadelphia for almost a year. While he was there, his young brother, Jim, joined the Marines so as soon as he got out of school, like Charlie did. He went to visit his big brother, laying in there with all the tubes and all. He didn't have to go. He didn't have to go because the Millers already dedicated one kid to the war, but he did. He did, and when he was there, he wound up as an acting squad leader. And while he was out in the bush maneuvering against the enemy, he was shot in the stomach. And while he was holding his stomach, he jumped on an explosive device. He too was blown up just like his big brother. He gave his life for his fellow Marines. He got the Silver Star. His Marines said he should have had the Medal of Honor, and I think they're right. This was the kind of people who were on the trip, American heroes. The other person was on the trip was a person by the name of Chu Van Lay. He was a South Vietnamese helicopter pilot. He tells his story all around Lancaster, Pennsylvania. When Saigon was fallen in April of 29 and 30, 1975, the communists shut down most of the ways to get out. People were frantically trying to leave Saigon. What was there was American helicopters that had been turned over to the South Vietnamese during Nixon's Vietnamization program. He didn't turn his helicopter in. He got a call in the air. They told him to land. We surrendered. Instead, like the other helicopter pilots, many of them, he got a full bag of fuel. The Huey helicopter says the max capacity is 13 people. He had 26 people on the helicopter, military and civilians. He flew out to the 7th Fleet and he landed on an aircraft carrier. In fact, if you remember that time, there were so many helicopters landing on aircraft carriers that they had to be pushed in the ocean to make room for more. But the other person who was a real star was a Vietnamese woman by the name of Lee Williams. She was 5 years old, her sister 3, when she was put on a helicopter. Her mother could not go. She and her sister wound up as orphans in this country. She went on to be a strong, independent woman, and she was a school teacher in Lancaster County. She goes out of her way to thank Vietnam veterans. We were so fortunate to meet her. She came out to our Vietnam veteran chapter. And she said, who would like to go back to Vietnam? When I found out that she was going, I thought, yes. She had already reunited with her mother, and she had been back to Vietnam with several groups of kids from her school. She sat down with the veterans that were going, and she made the itinerary to stop at every place from the DMZ all the way to the Mekong Delta. It was a very, very emotional trip. Charlie, for example, who lost his brother. Charlie stood there with a picture of himself and his brother and a Marine coin and buried it. Charlie wept for his brother. We wept for Charlie. It was a special trip. It was a good trip. It was therapeutic for all of us. We were there 50 years before as kids. We left some baggage behind. We took some things home we couldn't get rid of. It was a great trip. That's why I had to write this book, Sent to War, Returning for Peace, My Reconciliation with the Vietnam War. And when we came home from the war, we were in many cases abused or ignored. I was sitting in American Legion one day as a captain in uniform. And as I was sitting there, another Vietnam vet came in, sat down beside one of the old veterans. And the old veterans looked at him and said, "We never lost a war." He was demonstrating his ignorance for his fellow Vietnam veterans. We never lost a war on the battlefield. We got bloodied. We got real bloodied. The Marines got bloodied at Quezon. We got bloodied in the Oshawa Valley. We got bloodied in the Ai Drang Valley. But we always came out victorious. So the book also, in the annex of the book, I have a short description of each person who was on the trip. They talk about what service they were in. They talk about what they did. One was a flight surgeon. Other ones were just grunts like me. I talk about the fact that we had a draft, but it was an unfair draft. The people in college didn't have to go. That's not right. The Army should reflect the people who fight the war. And then when we got home, the most shameful thing was American soldiers coming back with rows of ribbons, being abused by American citizens attacking their own warriors. Vietnam, in my opinion, is the most shameful period of American history, behind only slavery. It's all in here, folks. Sent to war, returning for peace. Thank you very much.
Good. I have a couple more questions. What did you do? You were in the reserve, so what was your career besides?
Yes, I joined. It was a great part-time job for me. I was a captain in the Army National Guard, so it gave me, in addition to the GI Bill, it gave me some money to go to school. I went to Millersville State College, where I met my wife. I joke with people that it was a nice package deal for Uncle Sam. I got a degree, and I also come out of there with a wife, so he got his money's worth. I went on. I commanded a company in the National Guard. I became a full-time National Guard officer. I wound up also commanding a battalion. And as I mentioned, I wound up commanding a 2,000-man brigade-size unit for Desert Storm. I had a rewarding and fulfilling career. I would have gone any place I was ordered to go. And but like I said, my experience from Vietnam and how we bungled the war, and we did. And when politicians bungle, soldiers die, and Vietnam is a great example of it. By the way, you know, we still have a lot of Vietnam veterans who are suffering and will continue to suffer from Agent Orange. When we went back, one of the things that was really special, we actually went back to Vietnam and we took supplies to go to a school where kids were dosed with Agent Orange. You know, we were there for a year. They lived there. For 10 years, we sprayed Agent Orange on the people. And to go back to that school and to be able to take supplies back, and my wife, a past school teacher, to sit there with those kids was tremendously rewarding. We went to the Canteen wheelchair factory in Saigon. A local church out of Lancaster had sent enough money for them to manufacture 6 wheelchairs. Some of these people had limbs blown off during the war. They were still hitting booby traps years later. And they waited for us to get there and to give these people these wheelchairs. It's a kind of satisfaction that you can't describe hardly, but it's all in there.
One of the things I remember in the book was there was a time where you were involved in an organization that helped veterans as they were coming off active duty. Can you describe
exactly.
that?
Thank you very much. I am an ambassador for the Veterans Outreach of Pennsylvania. And our mission is to build a facility, which we did, for homeless veterans. And that facility is south of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, on the east bank of the Susquehanna River. We finished construction about a year ago, and we start intaking our first homeless veterans. I personally go in there to spend time with the veterans. I spent my whole career, my whole adult life around soldiers. Now I spend a good bit of my life with veterans. I'm a life member of the American Legion, the VFW, Vietnam Vets of America and Military Officers Association. I gave each one of those vets a copy of my book and signed it. And they said, let's start a book club. Every Thursday, I go in there and spend time with them. And we go through my book. And I explain why I wrote it. And they ask me questions. And it's tremendously rewarding and fulfilling for me. I have to say that I'm prejudiced. I like hanging around soldiers. I like hanging around military people. They have a special quality, a proven quality. They proved themselves on the battlefield. They didn't just talk the talk about patriotism. They walked the walk. 8% of our country, it's amazing, 8% of the country are veterans. And the other 92% owe them so much more than they'll ever realize.
Was there something before the Veterans Outreach Project? I think it was when, maybe years before, where you were some sort of a liaison.
I was working with the Liberty Warbird Association.
Okay.
And we had a great organization out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, working in a hangar at the Lancaster Airport. And years ago, 2014, by the way, I did a lot of flying. I was not an aviator in the Army, but I spent a lot of money later on ratings. I did a lot of flying with the Civil Air Patrol, teaching kids to fly gliders and airplanes. But when I found out that this organization of Vietnam vets was going to buy a Huey helicopter, the helicopter that I rode to in combat, the helicopter I put my soldiers on when they were wounded, I was in. I was the public affairs officer. I also was a pilot to fly that Huey. It was tremendously satisfying to get in the helicopter and fly over the top of some of our VFWs and American Legions on Veterans Day and to see everybody at the ground waving at us.
One of the other things I like to capture is if you want to talk about your family at all. You mentioned you got married, you have kids, grandkids.
Yes, my dear wife, and I have a wonderful wife. I'm blessed. She is my biggest fan. She's also my most effective critic. She helps keep me straight. We have 2 children. She spent a career as a teacher. And in fact, she still goes back to school and does substitute teaching. And it was amazing to see her. Some of the proudest times that we had back on this trip was seeing my wife in the middle of the kids, the special kids who had been dosed with Agent Orange and were suffering from it. And they took to her almost like it was their regular teacher. So yes, I've been blessed in my life. That's why I spend time with the veterans. That's why I go in to help these homeless guys. I feel like I've been blessed and I have to give back. I think we should all do that. I said in my book, I think the most important thing for a veteran is to take care of another veteran.
Were you involved in anything else besides the Legion? Were you involved in your church?
Yeah, we belong. I was born and raised as a Catholic. Oh, and you brought up a good point. When I was in Vietnam in 1968, my village was doing a sweep through a village. We did a lot of that, looking for signs of the enemy or looking for the enemy. And I ran across this huge shrine. It was clearly a Catholic shrine. It's about three stories high. And it had the Blessed Mother holding baby Jesus. And it was like out of nowhere. And I thought, where'd this come from? And at the time, I couldn't find anybody to ask. And it was interesting when I found out I was going back. I got a hold of Lee Williams. She talked to a gentleman who went back to Vietnam with his group every year. Went back to help the Vietnamese. He called a Vietnamese friend in Hue. And as soon as he saw the picture, he said, yes, that is Our Lady of La Vang. And that goes back to the time when the Catholics were being persecuted. And they were in the woods. They were hiding. The Blessed Mother appeared to them because many of them were sick. She told them to eat some of the special vegetation. And today yet in this country, there are many churches that are called Our Lady of La Vang because they were there by the Vietnamese people who came into our country after war. There's so many wonderful memories, so many wonderful things happen on that trip. It's a trip of a lifetime for us.